Okay, so we're with Cam. He's Canadian. He's head of the Canadian Youth Delegation, and something just went down in the plenary session. Give us a little rundown.
Sure. 6 members of the Canadian Youth Delegation went into the plenary session during Peter Kent, the Canadian Environment Minister's address. They stood up wearing T-shirts just like this one, turned their backs to show the symbol on the back, "Turn your back on Canada." After this, they received a round of an ovation from the crowd gathered there, actually, and from what we heard, it was actually larger than the one gathered by Peter Kent at the end of his speech. And then they were removed by security, taken out into a sort of holding area where their badges were removed, and they were taken outside and sort of kicked out of the UNFCCC, or COP17.
Why were they kicked out? What's wrong with standing up and showing your back to someone while they're speaking?
I mean, that's a good question, especially when, your youth are getting kicked out for standing up to Canada when Canada itself is taking a stand at these negotiations that is standing in the way of global progress on climate change. So I guess, for us it's kind of confusing when our government refuses to act and we stand up against them. For us to be thrown out, it's kind of seems to be a bit of an oxymoron if the goal of the UN is really to get, or the UNFCCC is really to create structure for a fair, ambitious and binding global climate deal.
So tell us what it is that Canada's doing wrong. Why are you protesting?
The biggest thing that Canada's doing wrong here is that they're negotiating on behalf of polluters and not the people. They're here negotiating on behalf of the massive fossil fuel industries in Canada, especially companies related to Canada's rapidly expanding tar sands, one of the largest, dirtiest energy projects on the planet. And so we're here, and the stand that we're taking is that Canada needs to stop listening to polluters, stop representing the interests of big fossil fuel companies, and start representing the interests of people in Canada and around the world.
But it doesn't look likely that that's going to happen. So what should the rest of the world do?
I mean, everything kind of seems unlikely until we can change it. But the rest of the world, we're calling on them to join us to start taking action against countries like Canada, and against all countries and all governments that are putting polluters ahead of people. So we're here as a small group of youth in Durban, but we're representing a growing movement that's showing its dissatisfaction with our government and the stands that they're taking internationally around climate change, putting the interests of the tar sands ahead of the people. And that's on top of an even larger growing movement globally that's taking action against extreme extraction industries like the tar sands, like mountaintop coal removal in the States, that are holding their governments accountable, forcing them to change. And so that's really what we need to do around the world, is build this growing climate justice movement, so we get to the point where we actually have the power to change governments and to change things here at these international negotiations.
You're pretty tight with the U.S. Youth Delegation. Also, you're sharing a booth with them here. Are you encouraging them to take similar actions here?
Yeah, absolutely. We're always keen to work with our allies from North America, especially because our governments in the U.S. and Canada are so closely linked. The U.S. represents potentially one of the largest markets for tar sands oil were to expand. We've worked with a lot of these youth and a lot of folks in the U.S. around things like stopping the Keystone XL. And yeah, we're absolutely pushing these youth here to take similar actions against their government, because as we've seen, the U.S. Congress is just as in bed with fossil fuel industries and with big oil as Canada's government. So we hope that they'll join us, and we hope that we can really, not just from Canada and the U.S., but that youth from all around the world come together here and take a strong stand and can actually really start to push this process forward.
And the next 3 days are going to be critical towards a new climate regime. Now you guys are outside of the halls. What are you planning to do over the next 3 days?
Well, we still have a good, over half of our team inside. We're going to continue doing what we've been doing for the last week and a half, which is tracking our government, holding them accountable, challenging them everywhere in every way that we can. We also know where they stay, and we've confronted them in numerous locations outside of the United Nations. So we're going to keep taking them on like that.
Great, thanks, Ken.
Thank you.